So, we're live on YouTube. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Live Irish Myths. My name is Anthony Murphy from Mythical Ireland. Welcome along to episode number 26. Can you believe we've been doing this for 26 days? In this evening's episode, we have a little bit of a change from what we've been doing in that we're going to be discussing a monument and possible mythology related to a monument that until 2018 hadn't been known about. Can you believe? Oh, my apologies, I forgot to put the YouTube chat visible on this window. So for tonight, I was doing some tests today on YouTube, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed that I have changed some settings which I read on the internet, so it must be true. I read on the internet about what settings you should be using to optimize your YouTube stream to prevent problems. So I made some changes, and I did some test transmissions earlier in the morning actually. And it seemed that they all worked out fine. So, fingers crossed, this evening the YouTube viewers will have a flawless feed for the duration. Fingers crossed. Tracy O'Connor is watching on YouTube. Hi Tracy, and hopefully maybe you'll let me know as soon as there are any issues, if there are any. John Main is saying Guramahagut while having a grand cuppa assam tea. Well, enjoy the tea, John. It's good to have you along. And Melza Lanine says hello on YouTube also. Hello, Melza. I don't think we've seen you before, so it's lovely to have you along for Live Irish Myths. Daisy Peters says hello, a very good afternoon from Rio de Janeiro, Mythical Ireland. Anthony Murphy. Well, Daisy, who comments on a lot of the Mythical Ireland YouTube videos, it's very nice to have you along this evening watching on YouTube. And Tracy says yes, will do. Good stuff. Thank you very much for that. On Facebook, we have to say good evening to Angel Barboni Smith. Hello, Angel. Jack Durkin. Hi, Anthony and everyone. Hello, Jack. Nick Eska Casterton. Good evening, Anthony. Hi, everyone. Hello, Nick. Alex Casterton. Good evening, Anthony. Hi, Alex. Evening to all of the Tua. Yvette Tillema says hi, Tua de Murphy. Hello, Yvette. Patricia McAteer says hello from Omeath. Good evening, Patricia from Drogheda. Robert Arbuckle, looking forward to this episode. Hi, everyone. Let's see if we can keep you all pleased. Banachty, tuning in on this lovely spring day with the heady scent of blooming lilac in the air, and that's from Erica Rivertree. Thank you very much, Erica. Tá fáilte ráit. Camilla Relland is watching. Hello, Camilla, how are you? Alan Bryett, hello from Johnston, Rhode Island. Thanks for doing this. You're amazing. Keep up the awesome work. Alan, that's lovely to have you along from the smallest state in the US. A very good evening to you, Bannacht. Barbara Barney says hi, Anthony. Hello, Barbara. You're very welcome along to Scailty More. Hi, Anthony. I know you're a musician. Please include anything you have thought about sound, music in the henges and monuments. Thank you. Ooh, interesting. Already we're only 6 minutes in, and already we have a suggestion for another episode. This has to be a record. No problem. And the boys are getting ready to take Coder Frog. He is very excited, barking the house down. He is. I'm not sure if you can even hear him in the distance there. We're now on to 7 pages in Microsoft Word of suggestions. Music in monuments / henges. Interesting suggestion there from Aaron Durrett. Yes. Well, we'll see what we can dig up. Archaeologists, never mind. Good evening all from Copenhagen, Denmark. And that's Camilla. Hi, Camilla. Laura Puente is in Chicago. You're very welcome from the Windy City, Laura, to Drogheda, Glan na Bóinne, the Bóinne Valley. Catherine Woodruff is in Wisconsin. Hi, Catherine. Kathy Cregan is in Cabinteely in County Dublin. Lovely to be with you, and lovely to have you along, Kathy. Maeve Fiona Callahan, greetings, Professor, and all the two of the Mythflix. Hello, Maeve. Federica Guy says hi to greetings from Italy. Good evening to you, Federica. Freya is saying hello and all the Mythflix fans from Sweden. Hello, Freya. Paul Blockley is saying hi all. Hi. Cindy Daniels Graven is watching another live Facebooker. Hello, Cindy. Nadia Koch is saying hi from nothing. Okay, Nadia, we didn't get the rest of her. Maybe you'll send on. Matt Byrne is watching. Hi, Matt. One of the locals. Good man yourself. Laura Adomitroy is in Blessington. And she says that Blessington... He's sitting in my front garden, surrounded by sun lamps, waiting for your story. Blessington is blooming. That sounds fabulous. Switzerland. Nadia, thank you. Matt says, evening all. Hello. Might like to hear some music from you as well, says Cindy. We'll see if we can organise something at some stage. Maria Mahan says, hi, how is everyone this lovely evening? Keeping safe in Wexford. Good to hear from you, Maria. Helen Guinan is watching. Hello, Helen. I bow to Her Majesty. Mariana Dunn says, hello, Anthony, and everyone from Virginia. And of course, that's Virginia, USA, not Virginia, County Cavan. Eva Anderson, good evening. I hope you had a good day. It's been a glorious day here in Gothenburg, 17 degrees and sunny. It was a lovely day. It was a little bit cool and windy, between 10 and 13 degrees, but it was a gorgeous day. Carol Barrett says, hi all. Mary McLean is saying hello from Austin, Texas. Hello, Mary. Helen says, hello. Hello, is that a royal wave? Laurie Tobin Redmond is in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Lovely to have you along, Laurie. Pull up a stool by the roaring hearth, grab yourself a dram and get ready for some stories. Corey Fodor is in Pennsylvania. Glad to have finally made it to a live episode. Sláinte tusa féin, Corey. You're very welcome along. Kathy Craig. And great work, Anthony. You're bringing so many of us together and educating us as much as entertaining us. Well, hopefully you're getting some of both. Yeah. Camilla Diaz, good afternoon. Best from Brazil. Lovely to have all these people from around the world. It's fantastic. Lisa Collins is in Minnesota. Have you on in the background while I work from home? It's a Monday for sure. Yeah, and some of us are lucky to be able to work from home. I can't seem to open messages. When I tap on a message, what do you call an Irishman who breaks up a fight? Asks Dave Russell. Liam Malone. Liam Malone, yes. Caroline Norris Heinz is in Iowa in the USA. Very good evening, Iowa, from Era. Wendy Holmes, ready for my lesson. Margaret Ring, evening everyone. Hi, Margaret. Might have to run as I'm working just on a break. That's okay, Margaret. You can catch us up on the video. Susan Mullen La Serna is in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hello, Susan. Welcome along. And Declan is in Dalgosh. Erin Durrett, hail to a day. Caitlin Moon, hope you're well. Looking forward to the episode. Still stuck in Baltimore, Maryland, not Cork. Yes, of course, Baltimore in Maryland, not Baltimore and Cork. And should I mention, there is a Dundalk in Baltimore, as there is in my own county of Louth. Nikki Young says, hi Anthony, first time watching an episode. Looking forward to it. Nikki from over in Lockerbie, southwestern Scotland. Nikki, you're very welcome along. Tá fáilte rot. Megan Walters says, hello. Tom Lawler says, internet is back. Do not know for how long. Fingers crossed, Tom. You'll get the whole episode out of it. Molly Michelle Kopeski is in Minnesota. This is a great way to end my work day. Glad to hear it, Molly. And hopefully you'll be at least mildly entertained and educated. Maureen O'Leary says, hello everyone. Hi Maureen, welcome back, lovely to see you. Desiree Riley, hello Anthony and the rest of the tour listening to Mythflix from Desiree in Louisiana. You're very welcome along to Live Irish Myths. Rowan Grove says hello from Colorado. Been having some internet issues, but now sitting here with a cat on my lap. Well, if that's nothing else is going to sort your internet issues, having a cat on your lap will do the job. Alan Bryett, I've been working through the backlog. I got introduced at episode 20 and already up to episode 10. Great that you can binge watch, isn't it? And lovely to have you along, Alan. And over on YouTube, would appear things are going well. Yes, the feed seems to be still up. Pat Rowan is repatting. Pat repatting. Hello, Pat. Pat is a friend of mine who lives in Port Townsend in Washington State, not far from Seattle. Kevin Anderson, not even late this time, from the American Midwest. That's Astro Gypsy on YouTube. Hello, Kevin. Welcome along. Paul Gowran says, hello Anthony and all the like-minded folk. Well, hello and good evening. Fáilte mór. Tá céad míle fáilte gach duine ar fud an domhan. 100,000 welcomes to everybody around the world. The Curious Celt says the House Martins arrived home in Antrim today. Fantastic stuff. I saw them at Nouth the evening, Friday a week ago, the evening that the new restrictions were announced, the basic lockdown here. So that's fantastic. Ronald McFadden, who signs as Justificus, is in Los Angeles. Hi there, Anthony. Suggestion for episodes: Tombo Coolnga and the labour pains of Uli. We're going to do Tombo Coolnga. Yes, we are. That's going to be heavy. I'm not sure if we'll do that, as episode, say, one of the Tawn 2, 3, 4, 5 back to back. I think we might do, say, 2 at a time and break them up. But yes, we are going to do Toynbo Coolnga. Thank you, Ronald. Lovely to see you. Melza Lanine, been watching on Catch Up. First live broadcast. Thank you for the wonderful videos. Lovely to see you, Melza. You're very welcome along this evening. Pat Rowan says, I'm off work today. Hooray! Pat, it's brilliant to see you. Lovely. Tracy says, feed seems much clearer so far. Fingers crossed. Mandy McCurl, hello again from the Hebrides. Hello, Mandy. Sandrine Brady, bonsoir de France. Bonsoir, mon ami. I'm back after missing a few episodes, but I promise I'll catch them up. That is perfectly okay, Sandrine. You're very welcome along. Okay. 14 minutes. Pause for breath. Fantastic to have so lovely a community of people from all around the world watching for Live Irish Myths. So before we start, the usual obligatory thank yous. I want to say thank you to, as usual, to Mythical Ireland patrons over at patreon.com who support what we do here and whose support is very valuable for the Mythical Ireland project, for its presence, especially on the web on mythicalireland.com. And the newest of our patrons is Angela Smith. And we'd like to welcome Angela on board, and also Aaron Hegarty. Thank you very much for your support, guys. And if you want to find out what it's all about, go over to patreon.com/Mythical Ireland, where you can consider becoming a supporter of Mythical Ireland, and you get rewards for same. And the rewards go, they increase according to the amount that you pledge. So tonight we are going to talk about Dronehenge. Now, some of you may not know what Dronehenge is, and that's perfectly okay. Dronehenge is the visual remnant of a giant monument that once stood in the fields in front of Newgrange in Bóinne here in the Bóinne Valley in Ireland in the late Neolithic. And without any carbon dating or archaeological digging of said monument. It is reckoned that it dates to somewhere between around 2900 BC and about 2400 BC, somewhere in that 500 year period. So after the passage mounds of Newgrange, Nouth and Douth were built several centuries after maybe, and immediately preceding what comes next, which is the Bronze Age. And there isn't a huge amount of Bronze Age remnants or archaeological evidence in the Bóinne Valley. This is something that I discovered in July of 2018 in the company of my good friend Ken Williams of Shadows and Stone Photography at 8:47 p.m. on Tuesday the 10th of July 2018. A moment I will never forget, because we were flying our drones following a drought and a prolonged dry spell in the Bóinne Valley, and I stumbled upon a giant crop mark. I mean, a series of crop marks in the field, which looked like a circular monument, but which had never been seen by anybody before and wasn't on any archaeological maps. And so Margaret says, have you any idea of its purpose? That's exactly what we're going to discuss. We're going to discuss if there is something in the mythology that talks about Dronehenge and what might its purpose have been, and if that's something that we can discuss in the context of mythology, among other things. So hopefully you are ready for an immersion into that. In the meantime, if you want to read more about Dronehenge, you can have a look at the Mythical Ireland blog, and you can see some 3D images which reimagine the monument, which are created by our very good friend, and I'll paste those in as a comment here on Facebook and on YouTube. Our very good friend Kerem Gogus, who's been a regular watcher here of the Mythical Ireland live Irish myth broadcasts, designed these 3D views showing us a concept of what the monument might have looked like. It measures 154 meters in diameter, which is over 500 feet. It's a giant monument, or was a giant monument. And what we see in the aerial images are basically crop marks of archaeology that's beneath the surface, but the crop marks appeared in a crop of wheat that was growing maybe 2 to 3 feet above the surface of the earth. Fascinating stuff. So I'm also going to post in a link to footage that I captured the week of the discovery, which you can watch while you're watching this. If you have the bandwidth and you're able to watch 2 videos at once, very good. And that'll just give you an idea what it looked like and how it looked from the air at the time of its discovery. So hopefully you'll be able to see that. Just catching up on YouTube. How many people are watching on both streams? Tracy wants to know. I'm not actually sure. Hang on a second. There are 21 concurrent views on YouTube and 70 on Facebook at this moment in time, Tracy. Concurrent views, I presume that means the amount of people that are actually currently watching on YouTube. 21 and 72 now on YouTube. Banachti O'Galliv Anton Connor Pockle. Looking forward to this and would certainly love to hear the town in the future, and we certainly will. Mila Boyakas for the wonderful content. Thank you very much. And Helene McCreevy says hello from the central coast of California. Lots of West Coasters in this evening. Lovely to have you along, Helene. You're very welcome. Tá fáilte rót. Okay, so that's Dronehenge. What were henges used for? That's exactly what we're going to try and discuss this evening. So I'm going to be reading from Dronehenge, the story behind the remarkable discovery at Newgrange. You might recognise that author's name. In Facebook, it's back to front. Eve Prum. No, that's Anthony Murphy backwards. Are there double road markings inside the ring pits? Yes, they are. Loads of questions already. Loads of questions. What was I going to do next? Oh yes, before we actually read it, if you are interested in obtaining a signed copy of Dronehenge, I'm going to paste a link where you can do so. I am glad to say that at the moment Ireland's postal service is working fine. They're working every day, and we're still sending and receiving post, which is great. If you would like to purchase a signed copy, you can do so at that secure link on Mythical Ireland, and I would be very glad to sign a copy for you and post it to you. So don't forget to get your own copy when we're done. Hopefully you'll be fascinated enough to do so. Ian Fisher says, hi Anthony from under the shadow of Crumbu. Well, Ian is in the wilds of County Mayo, very close to Crochan Aigla, or the mountain that we know as Croagh Patrick. Very good evening, Ian. Lovely to see you. Okay, so let's step into a little bit of mystery about what Dronehenge was used for and whether or not it might have been mentioned in mythology. So, Judy McQueen says, hello, I'm a bit late. Judy, you just arrived perfectly on time for the beginning of the reading from Dronehenge. 21 minutes in, that's how long it's taken us to do the introductions. I bet you all those watching on YouTube and catching up later on the Facebook videos, I bet you're glad you can fast forward the first 10 or 15 or 20 minutes. The functions performed by these timber circles are difficult to determine. their layouts, their monumentality, their investment in human resources, all testify to the deep convictions held by their builders. But the sounds, smells, and mysticism doubtless once associated with these wooden temples have all long since perished. And as usual, I'm going to chase the footnotes just in case I need to chase the footnotes. And that's footnote number 1 in chapter 9. If you have a copy of the book, that's from Gibson 98. If you have a copy of the book, if you're lucky enough to have a copy, sorry, I need to go back to where I was and find my bookmark. Sorry about this. We're starting on page 156. Julianne Osborne is watching. Hello, Julianne. Lovely to have you along this evening. Colin Wellridge says, Giagwich from upstate New York. You're very welcome, Colin. Tá fáilte roat. And Robert Bailey says hello from Chicago, and hello to the Windy City. Astronomy is the knowledge that guides us through the cycle of the seasons. All settled cultures have a calendar to guide their plans. And they're quotes from 2 books, one by Gibson and one by Bronowski, which is The Ascent of Man, I'm pretty sure that's from. The Bóinne henges were clearly designed with crowds in mind. This is a reasonable assumption or proposition based on their sheer size and the apparent complexity of one in particular, Dronehenge. The henges differ greatly from the passage tombs, which, despite their enormous bulk, have demonstrably confined, consecrated or sacrosanct internal spaces, not designed to be defiled by the presence of a large number of people. Catherine Wall McManus says, hi everyone, sorry a bit late, better late than never, Catherine, very good to have you. And on Creach wants to know what I think of Ackilhenge. We'll pass on that one. We can reasonably speculate that the tomb interiors, brackets, these tomb monuments are called she or otherworld mounds in the mythology contained in early literature, close brackets, were the most sacred spaces in the complex of monuments. Their entrances are barred from easy human access by large curbstones. At Newgrange, a giant slab of shale was used as a door to shut the monument off. Their interiors are liminal zones where the remains of the dead were placed and where, perhaps, communication with the ancestors and deities was possible. Early mentions of embanked enclosures or embanked henges in Irish archaeological literature suggested that there were possibly giant military raths or ritual sites. One struggles to imagine how the great embanked henges, which have their ditches on the inside rather than the outside, might have served as practical military or defensive structures. It is perhaps equally difficult to imagine these huge arenas serving as ritual sites unless we can give some useful definition of what rituals might have taken place in their interiors. Ritual was once a much vaunted term in the lexicon of the archaeologist, but over time it has lost some of its appeal, partly because of the reputation it gained as a term that indicated that the specialists who used it didn't really have a clue as to what these supposed rituals entailed. That's a little bit of light humour on my part. To make a ritual useful, to study it, learn from it, and to convey this learning, one needs to have a clear idea of what it is. The question in the context of the henges of the Bóinne Valley is this: can we usefully describe, or at least speculate, about what activities might have taken place in their interiors? Given the intransigent and enduring problem of lack of excavation of the Bóinne henges, and the associated dearth of physical archaeological evidence upon which we might build contingent hypotheses, we can, regrettably, only congregate and perhaps expand upon existing theories. These theories are based either on select excavated henge examples from other regions or are more generalised hypotheses which have been synthesised from broader henge-related themes, facets and similarities. So the long and short of it is that there are perhaps, just off the top of my head, because I know I give the figure, but I know it's been added to. There's about 10 henges in the Bend of the Bóinne area, and there was only one excavation at any henge in the Bóinne area, and that was at Monk Newtown in the 1970s. But that was a rescue excavation because there was construction work going to take place on it, and so it was limited in its scope. Several possible uses for henges have been put forward over the years. One suggestion is that they might have been the precursors of the historical traditional assembly sites known in Irish as Éannaige or the Éannaich sites. And I'll spell that out for you on a comment. Oenaige is the plural, or Éannaich singular, and I'll type that in also on YouTube. Éannaige, Éannaich. Colin Wellridge says, in my archaeology education, it became a bad word, and that's ritual, due to the discomfort of the scientific method with the qualitative and subjective nature of religion and belief. Well, religion and belief are a big motivating force behind the construction of many of the great prehistoric monuments, so one has to kind of consider them as factors, doesn't one? So it's okay. Known in Irish as Éannaige. The earliest surviving Irish historical documents demonstrate clearly that Éannachts were once commonly held throughout Ireland, both in Christian and pre-Christian eras. It was the king's duty to convene such gatherings regularly, and the sources imply that these took place on sacred land. Some of these assemblies were held at the time of the great pagan seasonal festivals, and were thus themselves imbued with sanctity. Both Éannachts and sacred festivals were scheduled for specific dates within the year, requiring fairly precise calendrical knowledge. And those words were not mine, they were quoted from Miranda Green, The Time Lords, Ritual Calendars, Druids, and the Sacred Year. Ronald Hicks, who has been mentioned in some of the episodes and who is an expert on Irish henges, has done much work attempting to demonstrate correlation between the sites of some of these Éannaige and the henge enclosures. Hicks says that Edmund Hogan's Onomasticon Gaelicum, a compilation of places mentioned in the Old and Middle Irish manuscripts, catalogues over 60 names of the Éannaich assembly sites. And this is a quote from Hicks. Only rarely have attempts been made to correlate the places with evidence present on the ground in the form of earthworks or other monuments. In the course of a project whose aim was to identify correlations between henge enclosures and Éannaich sites, Hicks achieved commendable validation. In her landmark study of the Festival of Lunasa, and we were reading from that, was that yesterday or the day before? It was. Oh my God, time's flying so fantastically quickly, isn't it? That was the day before, wasn't it? Yesterday was about Nouth and Douth in, yes, it was, yes, Crumdove, of course, yes. And Ian is in the shadow of the mountain there. In her landmark study of the Festival of Lunasa, Moira MacNeil suggests that most of the Éannaich sites were Lunasa assemblies taking place at the time of the beginning of the harvest. But what was an Éannaich and what did it entail? There is ample information about the activities of the Lunasa assemblies of Tailtiu and Carman, presented in the place name lore in the Dinseanachas. These assemblies in many ways resembled historical fairs, but with ritual and political overtones. They lasted for a week and were a time of funeral games, perhaps primarily horse races, to honour the memory of the local goddess, who can probably be seen as representing the grain about to be harvested. That of Tailtiu was called the Chief Éannaich of Ireland. The descriptions state that holding the games ensured that all would have food and peace. Failure to hold them would bring evil. And that again is from, my apologies, that's from Hicks. That's from one of Hicks's works. There was music provided by a variety of musicians playing all manner of instruments, and a rude crowd, noisy, profane, roaring and shouting. So these are descriptions of the historical Éannaich sites, and Hicks's contention is that the historical Éannaich sites were survivals of prehistoric ritual festivals. The king paid honour to each art, and there was a mass and reciting of psalms. Of course, that's a mass. Yes, I don't think we're thinking about modern Catholicism here. The conclusion of the festivities was signalled by a shout from the host with raised spear shafts. We can see that, superimposed upon an agrarian and rustic festival, an institution was developed which became the expression of the political unity of a province, a talchu of the almost realised aspiration of national unity. Towards this purpose, every beneficial influence was invoked, venerable antiquity, historic glory personified in the presiding kings, honourable inclusion of sub-kings and subject stocks, the cooperation of poets and artists for whom the Éineachs provided opportunities for acclaim and patronage, the interests of trade and commerce, the pleasure of a high occasion and great gathering, and, most important of all, the blessing and patronage of the Church. These Éineachs of Lunasa had become, before the political downfall of the culture which produced them, the highest politico-social expression of that culture. And that is from Moira MacNeil. Hicks, someone wants to know which Hicks book. That's from 2009. It might be a paper. Hang on till I find out for you. Apologies. I know the bibliography is separate to the footnotes. Hicks, 2009. Some correlations between henge enclosures and Éineach sites, and that's a paper from the Journal of the Royal Society of Antiquaries of Ireland, volume 139, pages 35 to 44. Okay, we find mention of such assemblies in mythology. In the story The Fairy Swan Maidens, in Eleanor Hull's translation of Ulster Cycle Tales contained in her book Cuchulainn the Hound of Ulster, there is a description which seems apt to include here. Once a year, and this is from Hull, in the autumn days, a great gathering was made of the men of Ulster, and from all parts men and women would come to share in the sports and marketing, and to meet their friends and make merry. The place was joyous and full of gaiety, with musicians making music on harps and fiddles, and singers singing, and jugglers plying their feats, and horse racing in open spaces. The warriors, too, were to be seen exhibiting their trophies of war, and telling tales of their combats and victories. And all were dressed in their best, and feasting and eating was to be found in every part of the assembly. Now, in that regard, what's interesting is a limited excavation of a pit circle, believed to be Bronze Age, and probably with some late Neolithic aspects, to the immediate southeast of the Newgrange monument. There was a preponderance of bone found in that area, and funnily enough, there's a majority of the bones are from pigs rather than cattle. The cattle are there, and some horse bones, and that's in a paper by Charles Mount, which is I think downloadable from the internet. And pig bone in large amounts would suggest ritual feasting. Can we propose that the Éineachs, the historical assemblies, had prehistoric antecedents dating back to the late Neolithic? ? And of course, remember that this is me asking questions, exploring the topic rather than making any specific conclusions. Kathy May Deo says, good afternoon again from Newcastle in Washington State. Hello, Kathy. Very good afternoon to you. Tá fáilte ráit. Bei Éineach amárach I Gundaí an Clár. There's an assembly tomorrow in Clare. I wonder what that's about, Declan. There shouldn't be any assemblies at the moment. August Harvest Festivals still take place. Amazing, the influence is still upheld. Yes, and one of the festivals that's held at the time of Lunasa, interesting enough, is the Puck Fada. From which Hicks? Okay, right. I think we've caught up. So I'm suggesting that the Éineachs possibly. Well, I'm not the only one, but there's a suggestion here that the Éineachs may go back to prehistoric times. In addition to the old literature, there were supplementary accounts of surviving traditions of Éineach Tailteann, which is Telltown in County Meath, probably the most famous of the assemblies, which, quote, provide unparalleled documentation for an assembly of ancient origin and long duration. And I suspect that's another Hicks quote. I'm pretty sure that it is. Actually, that's from Hull. There you go. But the earliest account of the Éanach Tailteann is contained in a poem composed for its celebration in 885 AD. In other words, several thousand years too late. It might be a stretch of the imagination to suggest that these assemblies had their origins in the late Neolithic, some 3,700 years or thereabouts previously. Hicks readily admits this is something that cannot be proven but rather only inferred, and this was in answer to a question I specifically asked Ronald Hicks when I was preparing the book. This is his answer. It's an interesting question, part of the broader one of just how much continuity of belief and religious slash ritual practice there was between the Neolithic and late Iron Age or early Christian times. There are several instances of henges, or at least embanked enclosures, thought to be associated with Neolithic monuments. The mound of the hostages at Tara being the most obvious example. This at least indicates that those locations were seen as sacred and had probably been so over that entire period. Hicks points to the fact that some assemblies continue today. For instance, the Puck Fair in Killorglin in County Kerry, whose origins have, quote, been lost in the mists of antiquity, unquote, but may be tied to the pre-Christian Lunasa celebrations of a fruitful harvest. It is held in early August every year. Yeah, Éanach, I think the anglicised version Paul points out is Aonach, Éanach. And in Irish, Oenach. Hicks says that while there are clues about the nature of the Éanach sites in the stories, there is no clear or adequate description of such sites. From the information given in the Dronehenge and other early historic and mythic manuscripts, it seems apparent that the Éanige are thought of as open areas. But there is intriguing evidence in Hogan's Onomasticon, drawn from two sources, the Book of Armagh and the Book of Leinster, quote, where the term Éanach is glossed as theatrum spectaculum or circus, unquote. What was the Miranda Green book you mentioned? A couple of people are asking. It was a chapter in another book. It was called Time Lords, Ritual Calendars, Druids and the Sacred Year in Gibson and Simpson 1998. And Gibson and Simpson, so it was a chapter that she wrote for Alex Gibson and Derek Simpson 1998, Prehistoric Ritual and Religion, Sutton Publishing. I hope that helps. So this is a quote. Theatrum, of course, indicates a theatre, though this may well take the form of an outdoor amphitheatre rather than a building. And while circus most often refers to an oval racecourse, it can also be used more generally for something in the form of a ring or circle that resembles such a racecourse. Spectaculum refers to the seating area in a theatre or circus. The implication is that the term Éanach refers to an area where people could gather to watch something. In this light, do henges look down on sacred glens? Well, a lot of the henges are overlooking the Bóinne River in the Bóinne Valley, yes. Megan Walter says, I absolutely believe they continued from prehistory. Things don't usually appear from a vacuum. In light of this, Steve Davis's notion of the huge rectangular extension at Dronehenge representing a prehistoric ticket office does not seem at all far-fetched. The proposition that the Éanige sometimes had seating areas for an audience is supported in the Dronehenge tales about Tailteann and Corman, Hicks says. Any doubt, well, wait till you hear this is absolutely fascinating, this is the clincher for me. Any doubt that the monuments of Bóinne might have constituted an Éanach appears to be dispelled by the fact that the brew is specifically described as an Éanach in an ancient manuscript. Now, I didn't know this, and I had never read this anywhere until I found it myself in Laur na Hire. Antiquarian George Petrie, often described as the father of archaeology, refers to a passage of prose in the circa 12th century Laur na Hira, the Book of the Dun Cow, allegedly written by Mael Mura MacElachar at Clonmacnoise, dealing with the major Éanach sites. There are 50 hills, brackets, mounds, at each Éanach of these. 50 hills at Éanach Cruachan, and of course that's Rathcroghan in modern-day County Roscommon. 50 hills at Éanach Talchan, and that's Teltown or Talchu, the most famous of the Éanach sites, and 50 at Éanach in Broga. And so you will have heard me referring over and over again to Sheed in Broga, Newgrange, and of course Bóinne, and that brew from the word Broga. And here, instead of brew or Sheed in Broga, we have Éanach in Broga. These three Éanach sites, which correspond with monument complexes at Rathcroghan, Teltown and Bóinne, are also separately described as cemeteries in the manuscript. The three cemeteries of idolaters are the cemetery of Talchan the Select, the cemetery of the ever-fair Cruachan, and the cemetery of the Brew. Now, the specific story, before I continue, that is mentioned in, is called Aided Na I Agus a Adna Cole, which translates as the violent death of Na I and his burial. If I can find it now, Aided Na I. And there, relic in Broga. And there we see, this is only in Irish. This is only a transcription from the manuscript, so there's no translation as such. Éanach Cruachan agus Cnoc in Éanach Talton agus Éanach in Broga. Now it's backwards for Facebook, but I know on YouTube you have a better chance of seeing it. Éanach in Broga. And there we have, in the earliest preserved manuscript, Laur na Hira, the Book of the Dun Cow, from the 11th century, a mention of Éanach in Broga. Oh, sorry, where was I? I can't find it now because it's buried. The post-it. Several archaeologists have suggested that the embankments of the earthen henges could have served as seating or viewing areas for spectators at rituals. This is a notion that seemed not just logical but self-evident to me when I first visited the giant embanked enclosure of Douth, Site Q, in 1999. The internal ditch of these embanked enclosures, it is further postulated, acted as a boundary between the spectators and the sacred interior of the enclosure where the action might have taken place. Might the timber henges, such as Dronehenge, have acted in the same fashion as their earthen equivalents? We could speculate, for instance, that the outer rings of post holes at Dronehenge supported some form of tiered seating, and that the double-segmented ditch features separated the audience from the activities that took place in its centre. This is not so far-fetched. One henge-like enclosure in County Kildare is at Dronehenge. In excavations in the late 1960s and early 1970s, Bernard Wales unearthed a series of immense wooden circular structures dating from the early Iron Age in the centre of a hilltop enclosure. He felt that the pattern of posts within these was such that they could not have supported a roof. Instead, he suggested they had served as the base for tiered seating. There may also have been an attempt at some timber henges to create screens or barriers between the upright posts, preventing or denying visual access to the interior of these timber circles. The banks of the earthen henges, in addition to supporting spectators viewing the activities in the interior of the monument, may be, quote, seen as devices to prevent vision into the interiors of the enclosures, unquote. Henge embankments regularly rise in height towards their entrances. This is certainly a feature of Site Q, the Douth Henge, perhaps further indicating an effort to conceal the proceedings in the interior from the prying eyes of the non-paying public who have not been permitted through the turnstiles, so to speak. The outer circles of posts at Dronehenge might have been designed in such a way as to support tiered seating on the one hand and to act as screens if there was planking between them. Astronomical function. A long-standing tradition associated with some henges suggests that they might have been used as astronomical observatories, and there is ample evidence that some are aligned on significant solar dates such as the solstices and cross-quarter dates. The large-scale embanked enclosures, timber circles and ceremonial avenues are more indicative of public assembly and ritual procession, perhaps events that coincided with predictable and universally observable solar or lunar events. The long-destroyed Ireland's Stonehenge monument near Dundalk might once have been a place where astronomical observations were not only carried out but recorded and relayed to future generations of sky watchers. And just in that regard, I wrote about Ireland's Stonehenge initially in Island of the Setting Sun in Search of Ireland's Ancient Astronomers, and a much more comprehensive chapter on Ireland's Stonehenge in my 2017 book, Mythical Ireland, New Light on the Ancient Past. Hawthorne in the Glen. Need to get back to this one. Listened to all so far from County Tyrone. Love your work, my man, keep her lit. Thank you, Hawthorne in the Glen, nice to have you here. And Paul is in from the Hill of Tara. Hello Paul, you're welcome along. An early 20th century historian reported hearing some very interesting information about the Great Henge at Carnbeg. This is the one that we call Ireland's Stonehenge. I have read or heard it stated somewhere that this place was the site of a school of astronomy. Its position on the plain, with a semicircle of mountains around, would enable an ancient astronomer to observe and mark the places where the various heavenly bodies appeared on the horizon at different times of the year. Please forgive Coda. He's back from his walk, but he's apparently still very excited. Megan Walter says, I'm picturing the elites in the seating while the peasants partied outside around the general area, hoping to get a glimpse of someone or something special and having their own games and business. In Scottish, Éanach means 1 steep place, 2 ridge, 3 large upland moor, 4 fair or meeting. Éanach appears in place names at mountain ridges from a height, sacred glen below, 3 levels. Very interesting. And it may not be covered in this chapter, but there's a whole thing about 3 levels and the ridge and the valley that I've explored later on in this book, which ties in with that idea very nicely. Georgian and Victorian era antiquarian writers asserted that there were, quote, astronomers' circles, unquote, or monuments renowned for astronomical observation in the vicinity of Ireland's Stonehenge. The great embanked henge at Douth, site Q, has opposed entrances aligned on the solstices. Because it has 2, and that's something that was initially proposed in the 80s by Ronald Hicks and confirmed in the year 2000 when myself and Richard Moore photographed summer solstice sunrise shining through the monument, through the aligned entrances. Because it has 2 entrances, we can propose the notion that the monument has an axis. Dronehenge appears also to have had 2 entrances, or at the very least an entrance and an exit, defined by the splayed opening in the curved annex at the east-southeast, and the gap leading into the rectangular feature. That's also what we call the what do we call it? Sorry, totally distracted there. The ticket office on the other side. And you can see those features in the video that I shared earlier. And the gap leading into the rectangular feature connected to the west-northwest side of the monument. Within a week or 2 of the discovery of Dronehenge, I began to investigate the possibility that there might be some significance to the alignment of the entrances of this newly reappeared monument. With the Douth Henge as my inspiration, I attempted to ascertain an approximate axial orientation of the new henge near Newgrange using my aerial photography of the crop marks. On Thursday the 19th of July 2018, 9 days after the discovery, I flew my Phantom 3 Advanced drone over Newgrange Farm again, this time with a very specific photo in mind. I wanted to position my drone in alignment with the axis of Dronehenge. If I could align the drone with the axis of the monument and also capture the features on the horizon, I might be able to determine an approximate orientation and possible alignment of the site. Looking along the rough axis of the site and using some of the landmarks in the distance, such as trees, to help plot it on Google Earth, I find that the approximate azimuth of orientation is 287 degrees. With this admittedly approximate azimuth, I attempted to calculate if there might be a solar alignment of Dronehenge. It was immediately obvious that Dronehenge was not aligned on summer solstice sunset, so what might it point towards? I thought about the cross-quarter days which, according to Hicks, quote, were once considered the beginnings of the cycles and are closely connected with the agricultural cycle, unquote. Hold your questions, folks. Hold your questions until the end, because it's easier to go back that way, isn't it? It's easier for me to. I'll keep doing the reading for the moment, and then if we hold our questions, and then we'll try to cover off the questions. Using astronomy software, I calculated the azimuth of the setting sun for the next cross-quarter date, the ancient festival of Lunasa, and found it to be approximately 290 degrees. This is not far, approximately 6 sun widths, from the 287 degrees of the Dronehenge axis. The local horizon is somewhat elevated because an observer at the henge looking towards the sunset around Lunasa would be looking at the steep southern bank above the river Bóinne at Rossnaree. This elevated horizon would result in the sun setting at a more southerly azimuth, perhaps our 287 degrees. Interesting in this regard is the fact that the alignment looks towards a place of topographical eminence and indeed mythical importance, which we've mentioned in a couple of other episodes, Rossnaree and or Cletchik. Cletchik was the location, or Cletty, the house of Cletty, as suggested in myth, of a mound, probably a passage tomb, to which Elkmar absconded after his ejection from Sheedenbroga by Henges. Furthermore, there appears in Tuchmark Etain a suggestion that the great henges would also be visible from Cletchik. And we covered this, didn't we, when we spoke about Elkmar being able to view the boys at play from Cletchik as much as he could have done from Sheedenbroga. In the tale, Dagda tells Elkmar that he will give him land that is no worse than the brew. When Elkmar asks him what land he speaks about, Dagda says Cletchik and the 3 lands about it, and the boys from the brew playing before you every day, and the fruit of the bowand for your enjoyment. Does this passage from myth suggest that Elkmar could watch the games in the henges from Cletchik just as he had done from Sheedenbroga? My astronomical investigation of Dronehenge's axis was not a conclusive examination, and more sophisticated techniques will yield more precise data about the alignment, but it can be broadly stated that the henge entrances or gaps point approximately towards the place where the sun would set at the beginning of summer, the ancient festival of Bealtaine, and at the beginning of autumn or the harvest at Lunasa. This is interesting in light of the earlier discussion of the Éanach sites, most of which MacNeill said were associated with Lunasa assemblies. Was Dronehenge built so that some great festivities could be held in conjunction with the harvest of the late Neolithic? We can only speculate. Lunasa was a harvest festival marking the beginning of autumn, and the main festival day was traditionally on the 1st of August, although celebrations went on for a month from the 15th of July to the 15th of August. The festival was named after the god-hero Lu, a supernatural warrior and god of light, very possibly a solar deity. The Dinshenicus describes Lunasa as a festival of assembly where political and legal matters were discussed and where ritual activities were carried out in juxtaposition with games and feasting. Jacqueline Kennedy has arrived. Better late than never. Hi Jacqueline, you're very welcome along. Oh, and Kerem Gogus is watching. You got a nice mention earlier, Kerem, and I shared a link to a blog post that has some of your images so people could see our proposed reconstruction of what Dronehenge might have looked like. Of course, this refers to the... Pardon me for a moment. Of course, this refers to the historical Lunasa. It is simply not possible to confirm the supposed prehistoric origins of these festivities. Another issue with the Dronehenge axis is that it might have been intended to function in the opposite direction. In other words, looking from the entrance in the rectangular structure, or the ticket office, at the west-northwest side of the monument towards the splayed opening in the arched annex at the east-southeast. In this case, we would be looking approximately towards the sunrises on the other two cross-quarter dates, Samhain, which marked the beginning of the end of the old year and warm weather, and thus the beginning of winter, and Imbolc, a purification festival associated with ewe's milk and lambing and marking the beginning of spring. Perhaps it was aligned in both directions, and thus Dronehenge might have been a late Neolithic indicator of all the cross-quarter dates on the eastern horizon for watching sunrises at the beginning and end of winter, bracketing the winter solstice, which was a major celebration at Newgrange, and also on the western horizon for observing sunsets at the beginning and end of summer, bracketing the longest days of the year. There is some debate in scholarly circles suggesting there is an absence of evidence that the cross-quarter days were important in the Neolithic. However, these dates provide a succinct visual indication of the seasons and are tied with the agricultural calendar. The cross-quarter days mark the speeding up and slowing down of the sun on its journey northwards and southwards along the horizon. At Bealtaine, the sun's rising and setting positions slow down noticeably as the days lengthen towards summer solstice. At Lunasa, the opposite happens. After the sun stops moving at solstice, which means stationary sun, it turns back along the horizon, heading south. At Lunasa, its rising and setting positions on the horizon begin to move faster, and the days shorten noticeably. Supposing there might have been some sort of great festivities or ritual activities at Dronehenge at Lunasa, these events would have been charged with a very special atmosphere coming up to the time of sunset, when the rays of the setting sun entered the interior of the monument, illuminating the participants in the centre. This would have been especially dramatic if, as previously suggested, there had been screens or barriers between the upright posts. In this way, Dronehenge might have behaved a bit like Newgrange, with a beam of light entering an otherwise shaded interior. Another aspect of the alignment of the entrances of Dronehenge could be important. They point towards LP2, which is the next henge over. You can see it in that drone video, specifically towards the feature at the centre of LP2. This is hardly likely to be accidental and suggests a defined or intended connection between the two sites. Coming towards the time of sunset at Bealtaine and Lunasa, the sun would sit above this central feature of LP2. One can only imagine it was some sort of standing timber structure, while shining its rays into the centre of Dronehenge through the narrow opening in the ticket office. Okay, I'm going to skip a little bit here. Yeah, and I talk about the fact that the subject of astronomical alignments of prehistoric monuments is a controversial one, and there are many voices in the discussion, some of which are antithetical. If cardinal, lunar or solar orientations are accepted, then circles may be deemed to also have had a calendrical function, in that the positions of the solar body at specific recurring intervals can be demonstrated and observed. The complexity of this calendar, however, remains to be demonstrated. Now I'm just going to make sure that I'm not missing anything important in the astronomical theme. One viewpoint states that, quote, it seems unlikely that the circular wooden buildings incorporated any elaborate astronomical or geometrical knowledge. I disagree with that, but for antithetical viewpoints, or at least for antithetical positions, or at least repudiatory viewpoints, consider the following. A wide-ranging study by mathematician A.H.A. Hogg of the layout of the 6 concentric rings of posts at Woodhenge, adjacent to Durrington Walls, 2 miles from Stonehenge, quote, concluded that the posts were placed so irregularly that it is impossible to reconstruct any original design that may have been intended by the builders. Historian John North, on the other hand, said that by adding a ring of posts to a monument such as a henge, quote, many or all of the key turning points of the rising and setting of the sun and moon could be taken into account, unquote. And North's work about Stonehenge is a fabulous piece of scholarship. So I'm more inclined to follow the North viewpoint in that regard. Maeve says absence of evidence isn't necessarily evidence of absence. Absolutely correct. Margaret Ring, the sunlight was the Olympic flame to commence the Lunasa festival, ? A brilliant suggestion, Margaret. And yes, Who knows? You know? Helene McGreevy says, love to connect with my Irish heritage. Brilliant. And this section of the chapter is called Let the Games Begin. Speaking of the Olympic flame, Margaret, archaeologist Geraldine Stout says about the embanked enclosures, quote, it is possible that these monumental banks worked like terraces, such as we see today in football stadiums. People may have assembled on the embankment itself and watched events taking place in the centre of the enclosure, unquote. I have previously spoken about the possibility that the posts at Dronehenge might have supported some form of layered seating arrangement. Dronehenge and Site P, which is the next one over, but it's the embanked one that we can see all the time, are so similar in their dimensions and design that it has been suggested the former perhaps served as a precursor or prototype for the latter. If so, perhaps the complex tiered timber seating, which would have required a significant source of wood, was replaced in the later version with an earthen embankment. The timber seating, if it existed, might have proven difficult to maintain and repair. A bank of earth would be a much more stable and enduring solution. The notion of the great late Neolithic enclosures as sports stadiums should not induce or arouse incredulity, whatever way you want to pronounce it. Controversy. Enough evidence has been presented to support this notion. One important source of possible information about henges, often overlooked by archaeologists because of its apparent vagueness or tendency to ambiguous interpretation, is mythology. Can the mythic traditions and accounts associated with the bend of the Bóinne tell us anything useful about henges? An ancient story preserved in the 12th century Laura Nahira, the Book of the Dun Cow, and the late 14th century Yellow Book of Lecan might provide a clue. In a well-known story called Tuchmark Etain, the Wooing of Etain, which we covered in an episode not too long ago, let us have a very quick look, episodes 21 and 22. This one would be pertaining to episode 21, the first part of the story. Dagda, the chief deity of the Tuatha Dé Danann, often considered by scholars to be the sun god, encourages his son Angus Og to go to Cnoc Siad in Broga, Newgrange, at the festival of Samhain to take possession of it from its owner Elkmar. Elkmar will be at Cnoc Siad in the Bruig with no weapon but a fork of white hazel in his hand. He will be wearing a cloak with a gold brooch in it, and he will be watching 350s of youths at play on the playing field. And that's from the Dinshanicus. No, that's from Tuchmark Etain. Where might this playing field be located, I wondered. The Bend of the Bóinne complex is situated in a natural amphitheatre. Newgrange sits on the crest of a ridge, allowing panoramic views over the entire complex. Pardon me. An observer such as Elkmar, standing on the top of Siad in Broga, Newgrange, would, in the late Neolithic, have a sweeping view over a spectacular collection of huge and diverse monuments. A series of 7 henges, earthen and timber structures, would be visible from the summit of the Great Passage Tomb, including Dronehenge. 350s, often rendered thrice 50, is an expression frequently encountered in the Irish manuscripts, and generally describes a large crowd or quantity, rather than the specific number of 150. And I think Tracy was asking about that in one of the episodes the other night. If Elkmar was standing at Newgrange, and I have previously proposed that he was standing on top of the monument, watching crowds of youths playing, it was likely that he was, in fact, looking down upon the henges, which were positioned on the lower terraces beneath Siad in Broga on the floodplain of the River Bóinne. Does this myth commemorate an early equivalent of the Lunasa Games being watched by the Druids or astronomer priests of the late Neolithic? And of course, I think that is indeed the case. That is what happened. Anyway, if you want to read more, the next section is about Dronehenge Reborn and the images that I shared with you that Kerem beautifully made, bringing the monument back to life for us. But absolutely, I'm suggesting that Elkmar, the mention of Elkmar at Newgrange, watching the youths at play, is a reference to Alkmaar watching the action and the activity taking place in the henges. So if you've ever been to Newgrange, you see how it dominates the ridge, and if you've ever been down on the floodplain at the henges, and I have been lots of times, you'll notice that you're kind of looking back up towards Newgrange. Indeed, it is Newgrange that is at the top of the ridge. I wonder if I can read this passage, if I can find it quickly, and if I can read it to you. Just in relation to that idea of the terracing and the tiers. Yeah, I think if I can. Yeah, what I talk about in a later chapter is the deliberate segregation or tiering of the landscape. So the lowest floodplain is where most of the henges are located, including Dronehenge and LP2 and Site P. And then there's a middle terrace, and this is all alluvial floodplain. This is all a landscape that was carved out by the glaciers, the slow-moving Mata, perhaps, of mythology. And the middle terrace contains what we might call the mortuary enclosures, of which there are several discovered again during the drought of 2018. The four-poster, the Cursus monument, which they believe is some sort of a ritual mortuary structure, and another oblong structure called the Frankfurter or the capsule enclosure. Now these are all behind what they call the Great Palisade, which is a giant fence of enormous posts that basically seem to have demarcated these areas. So you have the henges, you have the Great Palisade, then you have the mortuary enclosures. So that's tier let's call it tier 3. The lowest tier is the henges along the river. Tier 2 is the mortuary structures where you go when you're dead. And tier 1 is Schiedenbroga, the mound or the monument on top of the hill. And all designed or all laid out so that they're segregated and all respecting each other's boundaries, suggesting that all the late Neolithic structures were standing at the same time. The apparent deliberate segregation of the Newgrange ridge and slopes is of immense interest. The palisade might not only have excluded general livestock and other fauna, but would have restricted access to invited guests only, and that's from the National Monuments interim report into the summer 2018 discoveries. It also appears to have deliberately defined the area between the henges and the passage tomb of Newgrange, where the funeral and mortuary rites would have taken place. I proposed that there were 3 zones of monuments and related activities, and that these were congruent with the natural terraced nature of the terrain of the area. On the lowest terrace were the henges. I call this the zone for the living, where we could propose games, festivities, and huge ritual gatherings took place in the late Neolithic. Above this zone, on a higher shelf of land, behind the Great Palisade, were the mortuary structures, some of which are impressive in scale, such that their size is unprecedented. This zone, I proposed, could be referred to as the zone for the dead. So with the henges are the zone for the living, the mortuary structures the zone for the dead. The excarnation rites and funerary rituals would have taken place here, perhaps screened from the view of those in the playing fields below. On the top of the ridge sits Newgrange and its satellite mounds, at least 3 that we know of. This, I proposed, was the zone of the ever-living. In other words, I imagined this was a sanctified place for the deities associated with owning and building and living in Schiedenbroga, Dagda, Alkmaar, Bóinne, Engesog, and indeed the ancestors, whose fragmented and often cremated remains had been placed carefully in the chambers of the passage tombs at the highest point of the assembly. For a moment, it is worth considering the view of Alkmaar, standing atop the ancient cairn of Newgrange, in his druidic garb and his fork of white hazel, observing the huge crowds that must have gathered at certain times on the slopes above the river Bóinne. He watched from the zone of the ever-living ones over the zones of the dead and the living, and it can be asserted with some confidence that the view that he beheld must have been both extraordinary and magnificent. Would that we could go back, even for a short while, and see the landscape as he might have seen it. And that is all you are getting from Dronehenge, the story behind the remarkable discovery at Newgrange. And please, folks, I have tons of copies here, no shortage of copies, that if you want to buy one, I will sign it for you and send it off to you in the post at the very next opportunity, usually within a day or two of getting the order. And I'm going to paste that link in to where you can get the book on my secure online shop on Mythical Ireland. Anyway, at this stage, I would be delighted to take questions and comments. Now, there's been quite a lot of scrolling of comments on Facebook. Let me see if I can bring any up. Of course, I can't separate them by most recent on the computer. I can only do it by scrolling up here. On Creech wants to know if there's a better name for this newly discovered henge. I actually wanted to call it Newhenge because it was located in the townland of Newgrange. You know, and you would associate it with Newgrange, Newgrange. The media called it Dronehenge, and it's a name that kind of stuck. The National Monument Service want to call it the Geometric Henge, which I think, to be honest, I think is a terrible name. It's very functional and banal, and, you know, has absolutely no imagination to it at all. Dronehenge is all we have for the moment. I wanted to call it Newhenge. Well done, Karen. Was it the original Olympic Stadium? Interesting question, Margaret. Was it like the Colosseum? Was there something more awful took place there? Who knows? When we dig into some of those pits, maybe we'll find, you know, that people died violently, as has been found elsewhere. On Creech, dolmens. Apologies if it has been done before. Dolmens. We need to talk about the mythology of dolmens too, don't we? There is a work about dolmens. What's his name? I think it's in 2 or 3 volumes, isn't it? Dolmens is being suggested on Creech. I'm terribly sorry, but can you tell me what your name is again? I can't remember all the names from the nicknames. On Creech. Dolmens. Okay, that's in there. Klechik is a boar. Well, actually, I think it's a stony place. The sunlight with the Olympic flame. Okay. So I think I've covered. Sorry, I'm late. Kerem, I said hello to you, didn't I? How many stone monuments are associated with nearby wood monuments like this? It seems to be more and more common. Well, yeah, I suppose one of the difficulties there, Megan, is that we're only discovering some of the timber structures because there's no sign of them on the ground. They're only generally found when we start digging, although unprecedented drought conditions like 2018 help enormously. But remember that a lot of the crop marks were only visible in fields where there were crops growing. Although there were grass parch marks as well, they're much more difficult to spot. Henry Paddy Sherman. How long was that cultural seasonal knowledge accumulated before encased in ritual monuments? Staggering when I consider that. I have said before, Henry, and I think I quoted Alexander Thom in relation to at what point did humans who lived in island countries like Ireland and Britain and the coastal areas of Europe, at what point did they notice the correlation between the moon and the tides, you know? I think some of this information goes back much further. I mean, we're talking about Paleolithic astronomy here. Astronomical knowledge that had been carried for hundreds of generations from the depths of prehistory. So yeah, long before the monuments were set down, I'd say all this stuff was studied. Oldest henge, Declan Barron wants to know. In Britain, there are causewayed enclosures which look a little bit like Dronehenge in that they have the segmented ditches, are early Neolithic. Some of those go back as far as maybe 3800 BC, if I'm not mistaken. In Ireland, I'm not sure. There has been so little excavation of henges in Ireland. We're speculating. We're basing the dating upon dates given to us from digging in England. Newhenge is a great name. Yeah, perhaps a little bit late for it, but I don't know. Newhenge and Newgrange, you know. Nick says, so much information, absolutely gripping. Thanks for sharing, Anthony. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Nick. And that is only a taste of what's in the book about Dronehenge. I knew Dronehenge was strongly linked with Dagda. They say he had a temple. He was in at Alban Elir, commonly known to modern pagans as Ostara, in the part of the wheel now. Do you think Dronehenge may have been his temple? It's difficult to say, and that's because of the fact that there were several very large henges in the vicinity of Newgrange. Let me just think here for a second. There's Site A, which is the closest to Newgrange. Now, these are the ones that we definitely know of. LP2, Dronehenge, Site P, the 2 Riverside henges, and LP1. There are 7 straight away. And Steve Davis and others have proposed the existence of maybe a couple of more. So it's very hard to specifically pinpoint one. You know, Dronehenge, Newhenge has the appearance of something that is totally without precedent. It looks like a henge, and it also looks like a causewayed enclosure, and it's got aspects that we've never seen anywhere. The double segmented ditch features being the most obvious one. So who knows? And it's very difficult to make that connection other than to make it very, very tentatively, you know, and speculatively. Bóinne, says on Creoch. Good suggestion. Bóinne, yes. Woodhenge is thought to be linked to the great pathway from the River Avon and Stonehenge as a journeying way from the land of the living made of wood to the land of the dead made of stone. Very interesting comment, Aaron. And indeed, yes. Is Dronehenge linked to the brew in this way? We could speculate so. In fact, also discussed in the book, is a proposed gateway or entrance to the late Neolithic complex. So my proposal, which I talked about in the Bóinne video, hang on till I post that in so you can have a look at that when we're finished. In the River Bóinne video, I talked about the mooring of the boats and the arrival of the crowds and how they would actually access the complex. And how they accessed the complex, I believe, was through a timber-defined gateway at the bank of the river leading into the whole complex. And that indeed, that's the way you would enter. And if you processed or progressed up the hill towards the great monument, there is indeed an interesting suggestion in there. Och is a place. Och is strange. On Creoch is Katrina jumbled up. The strange heart. Aha, Katrina. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you, Katrina. Tom Lawler, well done. Really interesting information. This evening, internet coming and going, unfortunately. Not to worry, Tom. You might be able to catch up on some of it in the video. Paul Blockley, great stuff. I love the idea of the 3 zones of the living, the dead, and the ever-living. It fits in with the triple division found within Celtic society. Mike Parker Pearson talks about the idea that Stonehenge and Durrington walls may have served a similar function, with the latter being associated with the living. I think... do any of you have Disney Plus or National Geographic on subscription? Myself and Ken Williams appeared in a documentary called Stonehenge Decoded, and Mike Parker Pearson is in the same documentary. It deals with Dronehenge and Bóinne, and it also deals with Durrington walls, Woodhenge, Stonehenge, etc. Very interesting documentary. Perhaps you might just want to follow up because some of that stuff is in there. Jack Durkin says, thank you, Anthony. Stay safe. Henry Paddy Shearman, do you think there's a migration from Doggerland that influenced late Neolithic mound building? A migration from Doggerland that influenced... I've no idea why that would be the case, Henry. I'm not sure. There were seafaring civilizations, so needed astronomical knowledge for navigation, I like to think. Well, first and foremost is the fact that they used the Bóinne to enter the valley and to come in and out with their cattle for feasting or their pigs for feasting, and also for the materials for building the monuments. So yeah, they have to have known about that. And as I've always said, Bóinne is both lunar and riverine, and she's connected with the sea. And the reason for that is that they saw very early on the connection between the moon and the tides, because the Bóinne was tidal in the Neolithic all the way up to Nowth. So they needed to have known that stuff. Do you think the river ever flooded the area on a regular basis? Yes, Megan. In fact, it still does to this day. Not so much the area where Dronehenge is, or Newgrange if you want to call it, but a little towards the east, where you have the riverside henges. There's an area there around Mound B, or the Dogda's Mound, that floods every winter. And in fact, in early March, in the first day, or couple of days of March, I shared pictures on the Mythical Ireland Facebook page of that area in flood. Alex, we have Glastonbury here, they say, is more sacred to us pagans in Britain than Stonehenge. Yeah, I've been to Glastonbury several times. Wouldn't know if it's more equivalent to Dronehenge or Tara's stone. And the site where said to be the Great Hall, what reminds me, could we do a show on the Great Halls of Tara? We kind of have covered the Chocmi Chorta and the festivals there, or at least the gatherings there of Nuadu and the other one from, wasn't it, from the story of Finn and Cormac. Tara Halls. Well, let's put it in as a suggestion anyway. And who knows where that might lead to, because we're certainly going to do an episode on the Dinshenicus story of Tara. Stonehenge document, brilliant. Yeah, or documentary, so maybe you get a chance to watch that. Anyway, thank you folks. I'll hang around for a minute for any more questions, but thought-provoking indeed. I think somebody earlier on mentioned the lack of excavation. There's a huge number of monuments and a huge number of new discoveries thanks to the drought in Ireland. There are thousands and thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of recorded monuments. Most of them are sitting there under the soil, the remnants of them, waiting for the day that they get excavated. Yes, it would be really nice if some excavation took place at one or two of the Bóinne henges. A lot of them are located on private farmland, on active farms, and there's a whole issue there around access and permissions and all the rest. But then in addition to that, there's a general lack of funding for archaeology in Ireland, which is probably not a good situation. It's probably a little bit lamentable, all right, because wouldn't it be nice to know more archaeologically about these sites and to not be having to rely so much on archaeological data from other countries, and B, from stories about sites to try and extrapolate information about them, Any idea when you might do the story on Tara, says Aidan McCluskey. No, I generally don't. I don't have a set plan. I mean, I have a huge list of suggestions for episodes. And what I'm doing every day when I'm looking at it is I'm looking at which are the easier ones to do at the moment, which are the ones that don't require me to go off and do a lot of reading and research because I'm still working full-time during the day. I think Tara is one that we could probably do fairly easily without having to do a huge amount of research beforehand, so hopefully sooner rather than later. Jack Durkin, thank you, Anthony. Well, thanks, Jack, for watching. Epic show, says Alex Ihawa. Megan Walters, thank you, Anthony. Enjoyed this immensely. Thank you indeed, Megan. Yvette Tillema, thank you very much. Mr. Murphy, thanks, Yvette. Thank you indeed. Ihawa. Catherine Wall McManus, wonderful episode. Ihawa Agus Goramahagot, thank you. Henry says aye. Katrina says Arfiawas sacred site should not be privately owned. I know, Katrina, but let's be practical here, okay? We're a country where we're a food producing country, we're an agricultural country, and we have tens of thousands of monuments. You have to also consider the practicalities of the situation. Thanks, Anthony, says Camilla. Very informative and super as always. Good night, everyone, and stay safe. Thanks, Camilla. Good night to you. Dave Russell, there's a shooting star above me. Gorgeous. Lovely stuff. Maeve Fianna Callan. Just at the very end of twilight here, almost dark. Another excellent class here at Myth School, Mythical Academy, Mythflix Academy. Maeve Fianna Callan. Thanks, Maeve. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Jules Cousins is here. Hello, Jules. Says thank you. Missed the first half, so we'll catch up. Yep, absolutely. The YouTube version seems to have gone without flaw tonight. That should be immediately available on the YouTube channel. The Facebook one can take a few minutes to sort itself out after it finishes. Anthony, you're never going to be able to stop making videos because your list of topics is ever growing, says Megan Walters. Well, let's keep the fingers crossed that that's the case. Of course, we can always later on go over old ground and see if there's anything new in our, that we've discovered along the way. Rowan Grove says thank you, stay well all, and same to you. Declan Barron, my ire. Yeah, remind me where that is again. Kolosov says Katrina, thank you. Caitlin Moon, when the mess is over, we should organise a field trip. Brilliant stuff. Let's get some of the international visitors into the Bóinne Valley for a field trip. Wouldn't that be brilliant? Matthew says, thanks Anthony, 7-3s, which is ham radio terminology. 7-3, Matthew, have a good one. Mariana Dunn, very interesting to learn more about Dronehenge. Thanks and goodbye all. Good night to you, Mariana. Thanks for coming along. Rowan Grove, they have a habit of being found on private land. Ah, yeah, well, sure, I look. That's because most of them are on private ground. Can you do an episode on the Bell Beaker people in Ireland? Oh, Can I? Yes. Well, more specifically, can we extrapolate any information about Bell Beaker people from mythology? Yes, that's an episode that we could do. And that's from Paula Sullivan. Thank you, Paula, for that suggestion. Must actually save a second copy of this list or email it to myself as a backup. I only have one copy of it. I would hate to lose it. Thanks, good night, says Patricia, loving the gathering. Night, Patricia, stay safe. Declan Barron, Mila Boykus, Megan Walters, I'm not complaining. No one is complaining at the moment. We're all okay. Gurma, Mila Margot, Anthony, another amazing episode. Thank you, Alan. Paul Blockley, can we see the aerial view of the alignment and orientation? You can. It's on the Mythical Ireland blog. Absolutely, you can. If I can just find it. Of course, there are so many mentions of Dronehenge in the blog. Give me 1 second and I'll paste that in where you can see an image of... No, hang on. Sorry, I apologise. Dronehenge Astronomical Alignment. Let's see. If you do a Google search, you should get it. Yes, the Newgrange henge, a preliminary investigation of possible astronomical alignment. I'll paste it in there as a comment, Paul, so you can see it there. I'll also paste it into YouTube in case anyone on YouTube wants to see it. Yes, please, if only can. Good night, everyone. Good health to you. And the same to you, Megan. Okay, we'll leave it at that, folks. Join us again tomorrow. I haven't decided what tomorrow's episode is going to be about, but we'll make a decision on that shortly, and hope to see you all then. It's been a lovely evening. Really nice to have you along. Remember, stay safe, keep washing the hands, keep physically distant from everybody. Not social isolation. I hate that phrase. I don't like that phrase because it implies that we're disconnected from each other. And as we can see, we're having a lovely tua or tribal gathering here on Mythflix, on Live Irish Myths. Share the word. Don't be afraid to invite your friends along. Say, if you want to pass an hour or an hour and a half, in this case, in the evening, or if you're in the States in the afternoon, or if you're in Australia in the morning time, head over to the Mythical Ireland Facebook page and the YouTube channel. Don't forget. Physical distancing, not social. Exactly right, Alan. Exactly right. Good night, everyone. Thanks a million for watching. I'm Anthony Murphy. This is Live Irish Myths. We will hope to see you tomorrow. A sort Jemson to close the session. Astro Gypsy says, yes, I might have a dram myself to help me off to sleep. Sweet dreams, folks. Ihawa. Slán go fóill. And to the YouTubers, the same to yourself. Slán go fóill. Sleep soundly, keep safe, keep healthy, be well, and we'll see you tomorrow. All the best. Bye bye now.